Welcome, everyone. We're going to give people just a couple of moments to log in. Are people actually in? Did we broadcast? It looks like they
Yes.
are. Excellent. So welcome, everyone. We'll give people just a few more moments to join in. Although actually it's 3 minutes past, and I do want to be respectful of time. So let's go ahead and kick this off. First of all, let me say that I am thrilled that Lisa and Beth can do this with us today. Some of you know that I have a background in communications, so I've spent a lot of time working on these kinds of issues. And one of the biggest and most important issues that you really need to tackle at the start of anything is figuring out who your audience is, who your target is, and what messages reach them. And for many of you, that's totally basic. In some ways, this is a refresher. But we're also at a time when being able to talk effectively about this is critically important. And so refreshers are always good. And also, there are some nuances to what's happening right now. When we talk about a CCDBG and childcare in general, I always try to remind people that we have essentially the choir, the allies, the people sitting on the fence, and the people you're never going to win. And that you want to keep your choir, the people who get it, for whom this is about children and the importance of children, motivated, engaged, and working. But you also want messages that work with your allies who may not really care that much, for example, about how kids are doing, but care a lot about parents being able to get back in the workforce and being able to work consistently. And then you've got the people who are undecided, who are critical to win over. And then you have some people you're never going to win, and you don't want to spend time and energy wasting them. You don't need everybody. You need enough to win your issue. So this webinar, I think, is incredibly timely and important because it will make sure that this is all in our minds as we do this work moving forward over the next several weeks federally, but also we're going to be fighting this battle over the next year at the state level. A couple of words about housekeeping. Lisa tells me that they do not want this to be an hour of a person just talking. And so her presentation is probably 30 or 40 minutes, but you should feel free to chime in because you guys all have expertise at your state level. And in particular, you're probably seeing how particular messages are working in your state right now that can be helpful to other people in other states. And so please do feel free to chime in, and then there'll be a discussion time at the end. I think probably the best way to chime in during Lisa's presentation so that you don't interrupt it is to put a note in the chat box. And then if Lisa wants to refer to it, then she can. And if not, we'll go to it when the presentation's over. And that'll, avoid interruptions, but still make sure that things are timely.
Yeah,
Does
and
that
that said, Deb, I'm one of those, once I get going, I'm doing the show. So if you or Beth noticed, if anybody, right, if you guys notice if you all notice that there's a question and I miss it as I'm doing my spiel, please just flag for me, because I'm happy at any time to take a pause. And if it turns out it's something I'm going to get to later, I'll mention it, but I'd rather acknowledge it than miss it on, just because I'm focused.
You got it. I'm going to turn it over to you now.
Okay. Well, welcome everybody. So glad you could join us. Deb set this up perfectly. I don't have much more to add other than to emphasize, I think for a lot, this is just a refresher. And we feel like it couldn't come at a better time, given the next few weeks and, the year ahead. So I'm gonna go ahead and dive right into our audience targeting and messaging workshop. I will say before we begin, Beth and I strongly believe that, whenever we're talking communications, it's critical to always start with strategy. Hang on, let me minimize all your beautiful faces so I can see my slides too. And what we mean by that is it feels like, even those of us that consider ourselves strategists even, we tend to feel like we dive right into, the tactics, right? Like, what's the event? What are we doing on Twitter? What's the op-ed? What's the, you name it, the flashy thing that gets coverage. And it's really critical to take a few steps back always and say, first and foremost, what are we trying to achieve? Therefore, who do we need to reach? And therefore, what do we need to say that's going to move those people to act, right? And that's what this is all about. We're kind of doing the achieve part, you know, that we're kind of glossing over that today, but then really digging into the, you know, who do we need to reach and what do we need to say? So that's what we mean when we say start with strategy. It's those foundational elements. Let me get my screen back. Okay, so first things first, and I should flag that we have a few pauses throughout throughout this little workshop that we do to give folks a time not to just absorb it, but actually, you know, write down some thoughts. So if you have on your computer a piece of paper and a pen, however is helpful for you, I would recommend getting them now, because I think a lot of this, again, even as a refresher, is really helpful to make it as applicable in real life as possible. So we'll have a few times where we're saying, okay, that concept we just talked about, you know, how does that work for you? You know, bring an example to life, and, you know, we might share some as well. So first things first, when we talk about, you know, what we're trying to achieve, we talk about, when we say goal, we mean, you know, just always centering ourselves in the big picture work, right? What is the you know, end of the rainbow thing? What would happen, you know, what would need to happen to put ourselves out of business, right? We, you know, may never get there, but that is what, you know, but the whole point of our work is getting closer to that ideal, right? The challenge, though, is that for a lot of us, when we start thinking about the big picture goal and then we realize where we're standing, it feels like a lot of runway between those 2 points, and it can feel overwhelming. And that's when we start talking about objectives. And that means, you know, the incremental milestones along the way that get you to your goal. You know, and a lot of us have multiple objectives we're working at the same time, at the state level, at the federal level, at the community level, you know, development goals, you name it, right? But what we're saying is, you know, you got to break them down. Like, what is the step-by-step plan to get to your big picture goal? And I'm sure this is familiar to many, but when we talk about objectives, it's really helpful to think of the acronym like a SMART objective. So when you're identifying what is it that we need, what, you know, in the next 6 months, for some of us, it's the next 3 months, next 6 months, next year, picking a measurable, you know, objective. Here's the acronym to think about, SMART. I'm sure you all could give a tutorial on this too if you're familiar with it. But the objective stands for specific, right? What exactly are we trying to achieve? You know, this means, whether this means dollar signs, whether this means, you know, percentages, whatever it means to make this meaningful and concrete to you and your, you know, your colleagues. Be specific, be measurable, you know, like we were saying, how much, by when, you know, be achievable and realistic. Different folks see those different ways. For me, you know, achievable is kind of an internal check. Like, can we, you know, do we have the resources, the bandwidth, the knowledge, the, you know, whatever, can we pull this off, right? Can we do this thing we're trying to do? And then realistic is a little more external, like, is the world at a place where this can actually happen, right? Like, is this, you know, this isn't just pie in the sky, right? This actually has a shot or a really good chance of happening if we play our cards right. And then of course, time bound, right? By when, give yourself, pick your metaphor, right? A stake in the ground saying, by this time, we want to see if we've done this or not. This all holds us accountable, you know, it holds us accountable, but it also helps us get really clear on what we're trying to do. And then there's a little bit more there, you know, as Beth and I have done this over the years, we recognize that SMART didn't quite cut it. So we like to say SMART AF objectives. And what we mean by that is, you know, things change quickly. My goodness, 2020 has taught us that more than maybe any year ever, right? Things change. There are, you know, both opportunities and challenges we can't anticipate. So how to make sure that we are being adaptable and flexible at the same time. So again, we're just kind of grounding today's discussion of audiences and messaging in strategy, meaning always start with gut checking. What are we trying to achieve? Big picture goal. What is the objective that we're working under? And then we start talking, now we're digging into audiences, right? The first question you need to ask yourself is, okay, so who has the power to say yes or no to this objective, right? Who actually can like make this possible or, you know, could kill it for us? We use, these different examples throughout to, make things come to life. You can see here from adoptuskids.org, the decision maker here that they're going after, as you can see, is potential adoptive parents, right? So what I would say to you here is, think of it this way. A decision maker can be anyone who you need to move to make your goal a reality. For the work we're all doing right now at either the state or the federal level, right? Community residents, childcare center owners, the workers, impacted families, community leaders, governors, our respected members of Congress, right? It depends, right, on the given objective that you write down. This all, depends. What I would say is, making sure you're really clear on who that is. But here's the thing, for a lot of us, that ultimate decision maker, right? If you can directly reach them, if you can have one phone call, one meeting, and, they say, sounds good, we're on it, stop there. Use your limited resources and time for all the other work you're trying to do. The problem is that usually that we either don't have enough access or enough influence to that ultimate decision maker. So then we need to start talking about other audiences. I often think of the decision maker as the center, as you can see in this visual, the center, and then audiences of influence on that decision maker are kind of concentric circles around, right? So asking yourself, who are those specific audiences that your decision maker listens to, whether they want to or not, right? That are influential on them. And for our work, right, maybe that is, local, mayors, city councils, maybe it is, business leaders, take your pick, right? But it is saying, okay, who are those folks that can influence your decision maker directly? And then asking yourself, which of those groups you can reach, right? Where do you have the relationships? And get, as specific as possible here on who you're talking about. Okay, so this is where, like I promised, I want to take a pause so that it's not just like concepts rolling over you, to just ground the work and where we all are right now, especially on the CCDBG effort. So I would say just take, a few minutes. We'll take a little pause and jot down for yourself, okay, right, big picture goal. What's pick an objective, the most relevant objective, right? Is it federal funding? Is it, what's happening right now in your states? What is it, one specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, time-bound, adaptable, flexible objective that you're working on? So goal, a specific objective, and then just do a little thinking, right? Again, this is probably just a refresher, reminding yourself, grounding it in what we're about to do. Who's the decision maker? The ultimate decision maker. And if you need to, right, what are a few audiences that you must engage to put pressure on that decision maker to get what you need to happen? So let's see, we're just going to take like 2 minutes to give folks a time to just get some thoughts down, and I'll pause for water. And also, as we're paused, if anybody has any questions, these are great times to bring them up, or comments or questions.
And since we're paused, if you want to do that just by talking rather than the chat box, feel free.
Yeah, exactly. Do we have any in the chat box? I don't see. Looks like no.
Hello, this is Dadit.
Hi, Daddy.
Thank you for the initial or the introductory. I talked with Beth also a couple of weeks ago, so I got more education now with all this strategic communication.
Excellent.
But
I'm glad.
what I'd like to share is just, I know you probably don't have the answer yet, or maybe you do, but maybe you don't want to answer right now too. But really just what makes me think about your most recent slides. Can you influence your decision maker? If you're not able, then who does, right? Who gets to influence that decision maker?
Yeah, let me go back to what
Right. And I remember when I talked with Beth, I think she had some like research or something that says that stories apparently one of the most effective message through storytelling. And what Kids Forward is trying to do now is that how we can get these stories from parents, because we feel that parents have been missing from the conversation. Boy, if we can get some stories from the parents and they are the ones who deliver that stories, then we can probably have a strong message. So this is not talking about what kind of audience then, and we're talking about who is the deliverer, who is the carriers of that message.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think exactly to your, it's an excellent question / comment, right? That oftentimes these concentric circles of audiences we're talking about. So who's your, for example, just very quickly, who is the ultimate decision maker in your position? Like who would you say if you had to say? Who's the ultimate person that's gonna like, you know, give the funding, not give the funding, whatever it is that you're working on? Who are you trying to influence with those parent stories?
Well, obviously, well, again, it's not always right, but I'm happy to say policymakers.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Sure. And right. And like, depending on, you know, where your focus is, again, we were saying, we know that there's multiple things happening right now at the federal level, at state levels, at community levels. I'm going to make it simple for all of us and say it was the governor. I'm just, you know, whatever, you know, and you're saying, well, we feel that the parent stories of impact of how this is, you know, making life hard for them, how it's making, you know, them not being able to get to work, what, you know, whatever. We feel like that is an influential voice to be shared with our decision maker. Yeah, like that's exactly right. And when we are talking about those audiences, oftentimes, you know, they become what we call, messengers. Exactly, to carry, yes. So oftentimes when we say who is the best person to share these messages, you know, sometimes we are receiving the information from them, and, you know, say, for example, if you shared that, if a parent shared that that experience with you, you could bring it to the governor. You know, it's kind of like a conduit, but sometimes it's best to hear directly from them. Exactly. So yes, those concentric circles of audiences are oftentimes where we find our most effective messengers. Again, because we know that they have influence over our ultimate decision maker. Exactly right. Yeah.
And then I guess well, again, it's just more comments, and maybe we can talk later too, but now the trouble is not just about how we frame the message, but more about how we can encourage parents to be comfortable in this space of advocacy.
Yes, so that's 100%. Like, in fact, you could treat this, you could almost, if you want to workshop this for yourself today, right now, you could take this a step back and say, actually, my objective is to collect, I'm just making it up, right? 100 stories from parents that we can use to impact, right? To impact funding, to get, you know, their voices heard, to, you know, whatever it is that your strategic, you know, programmatic goals are. You could say, actually, the objective I'm working on is the story collection effort. The parents are the decision makers. Will they give me their stories or not to be able to use? And you know, so if you want to workshop it that way, you could, and others who are kind of struggling, we've heard it from other grantees. If there's a certain audience that you are really trying to get, put them as the decision makers. You might not need to go to anyone else, right? If they're the decision makers, yes or no, give me stories, and they know you, they trust you, you know, maybe there's no one else you need. But some of the groups we talked with, for example, say, you know, we don't have those relationships, but some of the partner organizations we work with do. So they become some of those other audiences that we need to, you know, leverage in order to get the parents to share the stories, right? We're almost taking it a step, you know, like lower, if you will, to like workshop this. I might say, go ahead and do that as we're going through, so you can kind of play with how to get those stories from those parents. Thank you, Dadeep. That's helpful just for others who I know are dealing with the same exact stuff. Any other comments or questions? hopefully that's helpful for folks thinking, you know, you don't have to take this to the highest of high levels. Like you can take this for some of the almost like foundational work you need to do first in order to go reach those ultimate decision makers. Absolutely. Remember, I was talking about how objectives are like kind of linear steps along the way, right? So maybe collecting the stories is its own objective first, right? Thank you. So helpful. All right, let me minimize the faces so we can move along. Okay, so now that we've talked through that, you know, kind of that foundational level, right? Goals, objectives, decision makers, we're going to start talking a bit about, you know, and the audience, like who are we trying to reach? Decision maker versus, you know, influential audiences on our decision makers. Now we're getting into talking through messaging. You know, okay, we know who we need to reach. What do we need to say to them to, you know, to get what we need, to get the action, you know, to move them to action. And this is something we, you know, we emphasize, harp on, but I think it's always important to remember that, you know, communications is not the same as strategic communications. When we say strategic communications, what we mean, right, is starting with who you need to reach. We just talked through that, right? Okay, what are we trying to achieve? Who exactly do we need to reach? And then it's thinking, putting ourselves in their shoes, right? How ready are they to hear our message? You know, wonky comms folks talks about, you know, stages of readiness, right? Where are they when it comes to hearing us on this issue? How ready are they to hear us? And then so important, and Deb hinted on this at the beginning, right? What do they care about? What keeps them up at night? What are their concerns, their values, their barriers on this issue, related to this issue, right? Because we need to know, okay, what's holding them back, if anything, from taking action, right? The whole point of our advocacy work is to get people to do stuff. We need action, right? If, you know, if we're just out here educating and nothing is happening, right, we're not moving the dial. So like, what are the barriers that are keeping people, our audiences, our targets from doing what we need them to do, and how do we get past those? So that's what we're going to dig into now. We're going to walk through what we call the building blocks of values-based messaging, right? How to meet people where they are and get them where we need them to go. So first things first, again, is asking yourself, what does your audience care about? And I mean, we're joking, but we're not, right? It's a spoiler alert. It may not be what you care about. I think much too often we feel like if I just push and this is like the whole world right now, right? If I just push my opinion hard enough, if I'm just the loudest, right? Maybe, you know, folks will finally see the light, get smart, you know, get on the quote unquote right side. And the problem is, you know, very, very infrequently is that going to work. In fact, you know, Beth could probably tell you or share with us, you know, go find reams of research that shows us that if anything, that makes people more staunch in their original opinions, in their own opinions when they hear folks coming at them like that. So the most important thing is figuring out, how do we find common ground, right? And to Deb's point before, you know, it's who can we move? We are not looking to find common ground with folks we know we will never see eye to eye with, right? We are wasting our time when we do that. So it's those folks, you know, in elections, right, where everybody always talks about the independents. That's the reason. It's like the left and the right are kind of staunch and set, but that movable middle is where the real change happens, right, and the real wins can happen. So how do we find common ground with the folks where we have the potential to find common ground? And the way you do that is you tap into a shared value, something we can both agree on, right? We're going to dig into that in a minute, but you know, what is something that they care about? This ad is just an example of an organization that did that. If you can see the smaller text below where it says family is still family, it's saying share your story of love and acceptance for lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender children. The value here of family, right, of loving your children. This is that is quite a value that many people hold, that we can kind of, for those that are, you know, they identified, for those that they could move, was a powerful value to tap. And then again, we need to ask them to do something. So we need to be smart on, okay, why, you know, what's their best reason to say, no to what I'm going to ask them to do, right? So those are, first things first, figuring out, knowing what you need to ask them, figuring out a common ground, what's a value I can tap into, and then what is their best reason to say no. And we're going to dig into that a little bit more. And then on the ask, right, on the ask front, generally there are, three areas, three types of asks or, things that we need to do, the task at hand for us. We generally group those into educate, translate, or motivate, right? If you are educating an audience, and this is a nice place to be, it's like they would do what you were asking, but they just didn't know. They did not have the information. And once they find out, they're like, I'm on it, I'm with you, right? That's one of the, I should call it easier, but it is one of the more straightforward tasks, right? This is a Moms Demand Action ad, and as you can see, this was a bit of an education ad showing folks, can you believe Kinder chocolate eggs are banned here in the US, but they're saying, why not assault weapons, right? So powerful ad. This is an education focused campaign, right? Telling your audience something they don't know. Again, another type of ask, type of way of using your messaging is translating for folks, and this is where, like we were talking before, getting folks to see someone else's point of view. And this is, a little more nuanced, right? Because it's not just saying you're wrong, I'm right, let me tell you why, right? It's helping to see how you can, how do you help someone, see another point of view? How do you make the invisible visible? How do you make the abstract concrete? This is a great example of a powerful visual that's helping folks see, when you see the stairs at the subway, I think this was New York City, for folks, it's like, you don't think twice, you grab your bag, you run up the stairs. For others, it might as well be Mount Everest, right? It's kind of, the translating are often those kind of messages you see that give people pause and are kind of like aha moments, right? So for some, that might be the task at hand. And then the third type, right, that I mentioned before is, if there's, you need to motivate people to act. These might be people that are with you, right? They believe in what you're working on, but for some reason they're still quote unquote sitting on the couch, right? How do you help them get over their barrier to action, right? And there's two general ways to do that. You either make the ask, something that is, feels relatively doable, and then we can like grow our asks. That's called the ladder of engagement, right? If folks have heard that, right? Ask for something small, sign up to get alerts. And then the next times maybe is like send a note to your decision maker. Maybe the next time is, I'd love to get a story, love to hear your perspective. Could we sit down and could I interview you and hear your perspective? Would you be comfortable with us sharing that? Right? There sometimes are a few steps before. And then the other one is like, showing that benefits outweigh the risk. For some decision makers, right, it's the political calculus of like sticking their necks out on a particular issue, and for some groups, it's the promise of giving much praise afterwards, of giving political cover after, but think of it that way. There's one is the show the benefits outweigh the risk of that ask. And then the other one is this, this ladder of engagement idea. Starting small and building so that you're kind of getting their comfort level going with you along the way. Something I want to mention that I think is critical. Beth and I are true believers, and we know there are different opinions on this, but this is ours, and we could share some research to back it up as well. But it's this idea of if someone has a barrier, you don't repeat the barrier and then make your argument, right? You don't say, I know you think SNAP creates a dependency, but in fact, receiving benefits from SNAP, blah, 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 there's research that shows like hearing it, even though you're pivoting to your message, reinforces that incorrect, myth that they hold. The better way is to, and we will talk about this just in a second, is jumping right into what we call your overcome the barrier message, right? Okay, so we just talked about the building blocks of good messaging, of values-based messaging. We're going to show you how you actually create it in real time. I'm going to skip my ladder of engagement slides. We already talked about that. So we call this our super fancy message box. You will see the things that we just talked about mostly are there. Let me walk you through how this works, right? There's 4 key message points. This is not a script. Think of this as like your lighthouse messaging, right? This is your like touchstone messaging. Whatever this work is that you're going to do, these are the key messages that you keep coming back to again and again in different opportunities, in different vehicles, different platforms, you know, different ways, but these are the 4 key ideas. And there's not 4 message points because we're just bossy. It's because, you know, folks tend to have trouble holding more than 4 ideas in their head. So that's both for our messengers, us, and the people communicating, and more importantly, for the folks receiving, you know, that messaging. And so it goes like this: the value message, that's where you're getting your audience to nod back at you in agreement, right? We talked before about finding common ground. Where can you find something, you know, that, you know, like, you know, that gets everybody to say, yeah, totally, I'm with you, right? And on, you know, the childcare issue, there's so many things that I'm seeing folks nod with, whether it's like, you know, it's impossible for so many people to be both a, you know, a caregiver to their child and work full time, right? Like how, like how could that happen, right? Or how can a functioning economy work without, you know, the foundation of childcare, you know, so that folks can get out and get to work. The barrier message, or what we say to overcome the barrier message, this is when folks say, yeah, but, right? And again, this is what we said, that what is their best reason to say no to your ask, right? So it's not just, and you know, there could be multiple barriers. We're saying pick one. What is the most likely reason that they are going to say no to what you need? So for example, with the like people that want, you know, if we're trying to get parents to share their stories, what a barrier could be is, you know, I don't know, concern over how it could be used, or maybe some like, you know, we live in a small community and I know even if we change names, people know it's me. And like, that makes me feel uncomfortable. I'm not sure I want folks to hear, you know, like, I'm not sure if I want people to know it's me, that, you know, that feels uncomfortable, for example, right? And again, the ask, this one's pretty straightforward, right? But again, it's specific measure. What's the specific timely thing you're asking them to do? This is never support us, right? This is, can I meet with you this week? Can you share your story, right? Can I, you know, whatever, how, you know, can you meet with us? That, you know, this could also be the funding ones, right? For those of us that are talking to state and federal decision makers. And then this one's really key. It's the vision message. This is the so what message. I think too many folks forget to do this one. This is the, you know, if you do what we're asking you to do, this is why you will be happy. This is why the world will look more like you want it to look. This is where it's you're reinforcing that value, that shared value that you tap to begin with. I do want to say it's important to know this is not, again, not a script. I'm not saying you got to start with the value, go to the barrier, then the ask, right? These are just the 4 key points. You could start in any place and use them. A reporter could ask you, so what are you here today to do, right? You could dive right into the ask. Well, what we're here today is for, did you know that? And then you're back into the value message and you're off. But these are kind of the 4 key points that you're always hitting. This is a great example. This one's from Beth. Beth worked on I think it was in 2018, to get people that had been convicted of felonies in Florida reinstated, voting rights reinstated, right? So this is, you know, wanted to show you a pretty timely, you know, example, especially because the Supreme Court just gave a setback to this, but we think it's a helpful example. So that value message, right? Floridians believe in second chances. And Beth, if you're there with me, I'm happy to have a backup singer, but I think it's pretty straightforward that the value to tap here was this idea, and research showed that this was going to be effective to talk about this idea of second chances, of paying your dues. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
So the law itself was called the Second Chances Act, and you know, they chose that and settled on it after doing a fair amount of message testing that really showed people embrace the idea that we all deserve a second chance.
Right.
So you'll notice in the messaging that you'll see that throughout. And, you know, really as you shift from that universal value to helping people get past their barrier, realizing that there are 1.4 million Floridians who were not able to get a second chance at exercising their right to vote was really troubling to a lot of people, a broader segment of the population than might otherwise have felt that way if it was just talking about restoring voting rights and using some of the more problematic terminology around returning citizens.
Right. So two things to note there. One is that I think y'all can see that the overcome the barrier message, right, is a bit of a, it's like we were talking about the education approach, right? And so this was like a, oh my, I didn't know, right? Like, I think this is kind of what, you know, you're giving them kind of a shocking statistic that makes them realize that what they believe in is not actually happening right now, right? And then what was the other thing? Oh, the only other thing I wanted to say is you heard Beth say, but, you know, and we all can appreciate the importance of research, right? And for a lot of the work we're doing, there's a lot of research out there that we can all tap from national partners, from each other, from publicly available stuff that helps us see what kind of frames are most effective for different audiences. And for this one, as you heard her, the second chance is the idea of paying your debt and then getting, you know, having that second chance was really, you know, effective for folks. Okay. So what we wanted to do now, again, we are not creating, and a lot of you have it right already, but we're not creating, you know, the perfect message box right now. Those things usually take, you know, days, if not weeks to get just right? Because as they should, because, you know, if it is literally going to become your, you know, your foundational messaging that you're going to come back to again and again, as we all know, repetition is key to successful communications. You want to put the time in to make sure you're getting it just right. So that said, what we'd love for folks to do is, you know, for the work you already jotted down, you know, pick an audience. What do you need to ask them to do? And just go through the message box process of just identifying, like, what's the value you might tap to get them to start nodding their heads, right? What's their best reason to say no? What's the most likely reason they would want to say no to whatever you're asking them to do, right? Just identify what that is. We're not going to work on the messaging jujitsu of how to get around it, but right now just identify that, right? And of course the ask, oftentimes we say start there. That's the thing we absolutely know we need to do. And then reminder that the vision, you're just, you know, reinforcing that value that you already identified. So folks, take a few minutes, just think through this. This is, you know, whether you're doing this on your own, with your teams, it's a great approach to work on together. If this is something that Beth and I would love to help folks with, already are helping some folks with, when it comes to, you know, kind of identifying the most effective messaging for a particular audience. This is, you know, we're showing you the, you know, this is how the magic happens, right? So take a few minutes and think through how you would develop those values-based messaging points for yourself. And yes, questions now, if anybody has them as well, questions or comments.
Lisa, are you going to, I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
Are you going to talk afterwards about using this message box, not just for speaking engagements, but for everything?
I mentioned it before, but let me put a finer, like, let me emphasize it. The idea is this becomes the foundational language for everything you're doing. You know, the campaigns are built around, you know, these message boxes, these message points. It becomes everything from, you know, yes, you know, speaking engagements, right? Like you can give a speech, you can give a presentation. This is the foundation for if you get you know, if you're get reporter questions. You know, if you're developing social content, you're like, oh, I know these are the drum beats I need to hit. The only other thing I hadn't said yet that I want to emphasize for folks is we all know that, you know, we're doing a huge storytelling push here. And this tells us what kind of stories, you know, right? This informs the kinds of stories we need to collect, right? Whether it's stories that highlight that value, right? That get folks to nod their head. If it particularly on the barrier front, this is where the kinds of stories we need to collect are going to, you know, be a game changer, right? For example, I saw, you know, and I'm gonna plug it again at the end, but you all saw that Shauna wrote this morning and said, we need to collect those stories to keep the pressure up on the federal side, right, over the August recess, to make sure folks know that, you know, reducing the amount of federal, you know, dollars going to the child care industry, that's not up for debate. And the kinds of stories that we want to tell is it's exactly about this whole barrier, right? Overcoming the barrier of folks saying, well, it might not be that bad, right? Like, you know, we're surviving now, we probably can survive. You know, it's not probably a must. So stories of childcare centers that have closed, that will not reopen, and the impact to the owners, to the workers, to the families. This is literally how we came up with, those are the kind of stories we need to tell to get over those barriers and make sure that, you know, frankly, the congressional decision makers know, like, this is not a squishy subject, right? This is a must fully fund.
Hey, Lisa, can I just echo
Yeah.
one aspect of that connects this to our previous presentation around ethical storytelling?
Yes,
When you are thinking about framing the stories that you will bring to decision makers, the message box absolutely applies. You do want to find stories that will resonate with their values. So someone who's really fiscally oriented and wants to know about workforce and things like that, bringing a story either of a provider or of a parent who's able to, you know, go back to work, et cetera, and how crucial it is to have safe, affordable, reliable childcare. The same thing applies with barriers. If you know that there's a barrier that your policymaker has, whether it's toward the issues around childcare or whether it's toward the demographics or any other characteristics of your storyteller, really try to connect those dots and be thoughtful so that you are not bringing in a story that will reinforce barriers, however problematic it may be that the person you're trying to reach and influence has them. This putting someone who may already experience vulnerability, oppression, other types of prejudice and bias, putting them in harm's way is not what any of us want to do. So I encourage folks to really think about these different aspects of the message when you are developing stories, when you're sourcing stories, when you're preparing someone to tell stories. All of these are kind of guideposts that we suggest you keep in mind.
Any other questions or comments on this idea of how to build, you know, the key messages for any given campaign, right? These kind of lighthouse messages, experiences, questions, comments, because I just have a few more slides. I want to talk through some messaging pitfalls to avoid. That's going to be really key to keep in mind, and then we're wrapping. So if anybody has a question or comment, feel free. Let me see.
Well, I think childcare used to be a little simpler before. And I think in our state and nationally, the ask is sometimes not as clear because we need more money, but there's fewer kids who are going because people have legitimate fears, and you can spread COVID in childcare. So it's been harder, I think, to be as clear. And I'm getting some of those questions from government folks about, and I think the other ideas, other options like unemployment insurance, paid family leave, other things that are childcare for children. They may not help the existing childcare industry stay exactly the way it was before COVID. But I can kind of see, like, if we're down 70% enrollment in private pay families, I don't know what money we could ever invest to get those people to come back until COVID's over. So I don't know. I'm struggling with this. We definitely are saying we need more federal money for any childcare that is going to operate. We certainly need a lot more money than we did before to operate safely. But I'm not sure we have as clear of a message now as we used to because of the context that if I wouldn't want, for example, me personally, I would not put my kid in childcare and I would not, so I have a harder time recruiting people to say that. And
Yeah, we hear
I'd like to share that in case anyone else is struggling with that.
Yeah, I think it's a really honestly, Leanne, you're reinforcing like the timeliness of us having this conversation, right? Because old messaging approaches that we all probably have memorized and are in all of our material, right? It might be time to, you know, to dust those off or shake them off and or toss them, right? And say, well, where are we now? And what is the, you know, the most affecting frames going forward for our different audiences? Exactly, exactly. So thank you for that. Here, let me minimize this so I can see my slides. So we just wanted to take a few minutes here at the end to talk about some of the most common messaging pitfalls that we want to avoid that make that, you know, can make our best efforts null, you know. And after all this hard work and the important work that everybody's doing, let's not let the we're selling ideas, right? We're trying to move people with our words. So how do we do that in the most effective way? So the first one, and you know, Beth could give a masterclass on all of these, but the first one is this idea of too often we, you know, I'm just, you know, pick your issue in the advocacy world. We tend to focus more on the issues versus people, right? And the problem with that is the people, as we all know, that's why, you know, I'm preaching to the choir. That's why we're doing story collection efforts and story sharing efforts, is because when we talk about issues, it can feel very dry. I don't know if that's the best word, right? But it's, you know, it feels very academic when we're talking about and too often, I mean, always, the things that we're working so hard for, the reason is because there's actual people at the other end, you know, standing, you know, that are either suffering or standing to have such a better experience if only, you know, we could get past some of these structural or systemic barriers. So making sure we are putting real faces and real perspectives and real experiences forward versus just keeping things at the issue level is incredibly important and persuasive. And yeah, again, Beth, jump in anytime if I miss a key point. Another one that we think is really important for folks to keep in mind, and this happens, you know, even when we're talking about childcare, right? We're talking, I mean, we were talking about children, we were talking about families, we are talking about, you know, like this is, you know, things that, you know, have such, you know, lend themselves so well to stories and compelling narratives. But if we just focus on, you know, the amount of funding dollars, you know, 30% have closed, you know, 50% of all childcare centers might close permanently. You know, when we're just throwing out data and numbers, period, that kind of, again, strips away the emotional pull of what we're trying to do. And also putting out numbers without scale doesn't help us at all, because it doesn't help people understand the scope or the magnitude of the issue at hand. Beth and I love this ad from She Should Run that says, if you see it, it says, if women's representation in Congress was the Golden Gate Bridge, we'd be here. Well, this is all the bridge we'd have, right? And you see at the bottom, it says women are currently only 18%. This was, you know, a few years ago, so it's more, but it's still not nearly enough. So women are currently only 18% of Congress. I'm so over it. Like, let's go. It's, you know, again, I think this is another example of an education campaign. If people didn't know, right, what a great way to use, you know, whether you want to call it social math or just giving people the idea, the number, the percentage, but with scale and with oomph behind it, right, to really paint that picture and make the problem here come alive for folks. And then last but certainly not least, this idea, and I think I've been saying it throughout, this idea of facts without feelings. Beth, can you speak a little to this one? I know this is a visual that you gathered, and I think it just really paints a picture of, like, we are talking about such a serious issue, and if I'm looking at it, I'm just seeing a bar chart.
Yeah, that's it, exactly. That, you know, when you are dealing with really serious issues of threats to people's livelihoods, their health, their quality of life, their well-being, their future, all of those are tied into our current situation around the childcare crisis. And so laying it out in this kind of static visual way, especially when you're going to talk about issues of equity, I think it takes people's feelings out of the whole equation. It removes us from the situation. It can feel a little clinical. It's not to say you might not want to have graphic representations of things, but to make sure that they're always used in conjunction with either a story, a different kind of visual language that offers context, and more humanity, because it is a lot easier to turn away from a bar chart than it is from a face. And so I think, we really encourage people, when you are working in such a highly charged environment, that our opposition is already emotional. And so meeting emotion with emotion is actually not, doesn't necessarily escalate, can actually help de-escalate, and lead to common ground.
Right. Thank you, Beth. So that is, I'm just doing a time check. Yeah, we're already at 2:53, and I definitely have really appreciated the engagement from folks. That is the end of the presentation. We wanted to walk you through, again, always starting with strategy, the idea of decision makers versus influential audiences, right? And then talking through this values-based messaging approach, which is so critical to getting any kind of real headway made. Does anyone have any questions or comments here at the end?
I have a question for our audience. What are you hearing from your targets that suggests what values you might want to be playing to?
So, and as a reminder, when we talk about the values, right, that's the common ground, that idea of the things that we could say to get folks nodding, so you don't necessarily have to distill it down into, second chances. It's hard to actually get it down into the 1 or 2 word concept, but what are some of the things, the values that you guys are thinking, that y'all are thinking of tapping, or that are currently working with you, where you're seeing that you're getting headway on finding that common ground with folks?
I think safe, healthy, and quality places where kids can learn. Everyone agrees on that. We're still not sure how much money and what we can do around safe and healthy, it's just so confusing right now. With even able to learn. Is a challenge. I feel less confident that if you gave me the money that I could guarantee that. Because of just these huge challenges right now, especially with the schools, with the wacky schedules, and childcare getting paid $12 an hour and supervising distance learning. It's just, it really gets people emotional, and it's not as clear of a case to make, other than everyone understands, yes, we needed more money before the COVID crisis. We were well underfunded. And this has just made the need for money even more significant. That's what I would say.
Other thoughts?
Kate, I'm going to put you on the spot. I think you had your listening session in Nevada. What did you hear there as the community was trying to figure out how to deal with this? What were the values? Sorry about putting you on the spot, but I think it's important that we hear what you learned.
And if you're there, Kate, you might be on mute because we don't hear. Okay, she might have stepped away. Other reactions? Okay. Deb, any other questions for folks before I leave them with one last thought?
I think, you don't need to tell me right now, but if there are useful things around specifically audiences and targeting messages that you realize we can be giving you later, it would be really great if you let us know that after you've sort of taken this back and mulled it over. You don't need to tell us what it is right now, but if there are ways for us to build on this webinar, please let us know.
Please do. Beth and I and our other colleagues at Red Tree are happy to help in any way we can. I actually have two last things, so I'm cheating. The one is, I think through Jasmine, we sent out the message platform that we had developed for folks. And Beth, can you give folks just a little, what is a message platform and what can they find there that would be helpful to, that's related to what we just walked through?
Sure. So a message platform, there's so many structures for messages. You've probably heard of message box and triangle and et cetera. So choose your shape. But a message platform is an overarching narrative. It could be for an organization's identity, it could be for a campaign's identity, but what it does is lay out in kind of top line language the why. So what is the need or opportunity or problem you're solving? So why do we exist, and why is there a need for our action? There's an our response point.
Here's what we're doing.
Here's what we're doing. It's sort of, we're organizing, we're meeting, we're, mailing and social mediaing and all those things. So it can be tactical, but it can also be kind of how you're working as well. And finally, there's a vision that says, here's what we see the world looking like when we win. And under each of those, you can have lots of subpoints that add additional anecdotes, data, etc. It is distinct from the message box that Lisa just presented, because the message box is intended to be used to tailor your message. So it connects to your message platform, which should have the same kind of feel and use some of the same wording, but it's really intended to be for an audience that you've segmented down, so that I need to speak to fiscal conservatives who represent rural districts, and I can make an ask of them based on what I know about their values, what I know about their barriers, and then connect that to a vision we share.
Yeah, thanks, Beth. Yeah, I often tell folks it's almost like the message platform is the 101. It's almost audience agnostic, because we'll be talking to multiple audiences, through the big picture work. And then depending on who you're drilling down and talking to at a given time, then the message box is almost the 201 of depending on, right, which audience, which aspects of the platform, frankly, are you turning the volume up on for them to pay, but again, finding common ground and dealing with their respective barriers. So just wanted to flag for folks that is out there for you, and we hope you find it useful. And the only other thing I wanted to flag, I mentioned it before, Shauna sent a message a few hours ago letting you know that we are working hard on kind of at the federal level, right, keeping the drumbeat going for full federal funding for this next relief package from Congress. And we desperately would love to get from you all stories specifically of if you already have stories you've collected of centers that have closed, whether permanently or temporarily, both from the owners, the workers, the parents. These are things we would love to, utilize them through a, social media campaign. You could see this being a drumbeat throughout of personal experiences. We could use it both static and in video form. This is stuff that we know reporters would love to both talk to folks and receive that information. So if you have those at your fingertips, Beth and I will be reaching out individually to kind of follow up and see what exists that, again, your community, voices, the folks that were, comfortable enough to share with you would be comfortable enough to share with us at a broader level. And of course, this is stuff that, will hopefully be very applicable for your respective state efforts as well. So hopefully kind of a 2-for-1. So, be on the lookout for us requesting help on that front. Deb, anything else to add? Yes.
Lisa, before we log off, Kate apparently had stepped away for a moment, but she's back.
Oh, good.
So I've invited her to go ahead and answer the question. Kate, what our question is when you had your community conversations, right, about the different options that the state should be looking at for childcare and after school and all of that, and we're wondering what were the values that emerged out of that people wanted to meet, not the particular recommendations for how to meet them, but for example, in Rhode Island, what Leanne's hearing is safe, healthy, and quality where they can learn. Were those the values that emerged out of your conversations? Was there a different value we should know about? I think it's really helpful to start with values, and I'm wondering what you're hearing in Nevada.
Yeah, those are definitely the big ones, the safety and health of kids. And then we're also hearing like the small group sizes and having like smaller ratios. And it depends on the group too. So we've had provider roundtables, which is one perspective. And then we've also had like business leader, elected official roundtables as well. And so their perspective on it is a little bit different, but I'd be happy to share all of that stuff. I was looking at Shauna's email earlier, so I can share all of that.
Thank you, Kate. We'd love to hear it. Yeah, my initial, and I know we're a few minutes over, so we'll let you go. We're big on starting and ending on time, but my initial thought when you said folks were talking about the small group sessions, that almost feels like it ladders up to folks being like, to like solutions or something as a value, something like, you know, this is what it is, you know, we're all navigating the best we can. We've got to find tangible solutions for now, right? While we are all struggling now, the small group sizes seems to be one doable for some solution. I mean, I'm oversimplifying, right? And it's always the perspective of the people you're talking to, but to them that feels like a potential doable solution. Like the idea that like we need to, you know, we can't just sit and be stressed. Like we've got to figure out how to get through this together.
Yeah, that's definitely something that we're hitting in Nevada, where we as advocates are finding that the local communities are hitting the ground running, and they're not sitting by waiting anymore. So we're either helping, pitching in as much as we can, providing guidance and feedback, or you know, we're just stepping back and letting them do it. So
Did stability come up as a value?
it has come up at the state level, and then on the advocacy side, yeah, it's not something that elected officials or business leaders are thinking about. Childcare providers even really aren't thinking about it. They want more of the like short-term response funds and supports. But the ones that have reached out to us with those concerns are already relatively stable. So, yeah.
Got it.
If you would share your notes, I think that'd be really great, because I do think you've heard from a bunch of our different target audiences. And as Lisa was saying, it's really important to know what your audiences want to hear. And you're the first group I know of that's really been checking that. So that'd be wonderful.
Yeah, and Kate, we're due for a check-in anyway, and it sounds like you might have some, you know, both for, I'd love to help on the ground, and it sounds like you might have some great insights for us to share for the federal campaign we're trying to kick off as well.
Sure, I would love to, yeah.
Okay, great. All right, with that, thank you all so much for your time and your intention and your engagement, and we will be talking soon. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lisa and Beth. This was a really good reminder that we have to start with those core values. I appreciate it a lot.
Thank you, Deb. We appreciate it.
Thanks so much for being part of it.
Yeah, I'm going to stop the recording now.
Okay.